It was a clear and quiet afternoon on May 25, 1979. The skies over Chicago were a calm blue, and O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, buzzed with the usual pre-Memorial Day weekend rush. Among the countless flights scheduled to depart that day was American Airlines Flight 191, a McDonnell Douglas DC-10 bound for Los Angeles. To everyone on board at 258 passengers and 13 crew members, it was supposed to be just another routine flight. Families were heading to vacations, business travelers to meetings, and flight attendants were running through their practice motions of greeting passengers with smiles that had become second nature. None of them could have imagined that within minutes of takeoff, they would be part of one of the deadliest aviation disasters in American history. At Gate K5, the crew of Flight 191 prepared for departure. The captain that day was Walter Lux, a seasoned pilot with over 22,000 hours of flying experience. His first officer was James Dillard, equally competent, and flight engineer Alfred Utovich, responsible for monitoring the plane's complex systems. The DC-10 was a powerful wide-body aircraft, known for its 3-engine Designa 2 mounted under each wing and 1 embedded in the tail. It was a modern marvel of aviation technology, representing a new era of faster, longer-range travel. Passengers settled into their seats, some reading newspapers, others chatting excitedly about their weekend plans. For a few minutes, everything was normal. At 2:50 p.m., Flight 191 began taxiing toward runway 32R. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the fuselage as the aircraft slowly made its way into position. From the control tower, air traffic controllers gave the final clearance for takeoff. The DC-10 started its roll, accelerating rapidly down the runway. Passengers felt the familiar push against their seats as the aircraft gained speed at 100 knots, then 120, 140. The nose lifted gracefully, and moments later, the plane was airborne. The earth fell away beneath them as the city of Chicago stretched out in the distance. But just as the aircraft left the ground, disaster struck. Witnesses on the ground noticed something horrifying. The left engine, mounted beneath the wing, suddenly broke loose. It separated completely, flipping over the top of the wing before crashing to the runway. A massive cloud of dust and debris followed. To those watching from nearby, it was an unbelievable sight, a jetliner losing an entire engine in midair. In the cockpit, alarms blared. Captain Lux and his crew had no idea the engine had not only detached, but in doing so, had ripped through critical hydraulic and electrical lines in the left wing. The DC-10 continued to climb, but it was already in mortal danger. Losing one engine was not in itself a fatal event. Aircraft are designed to fly even with one engine out. However, this situation was far worse than that. The separation of the engine damaged the leading-edge slats on the left wing, devices that help provide lift at lower speeds. The pilots, following their training and standard procedures, pulled back slightly on the throttles and raised the landing gear. But without knowing it, that action sealed their fate. With the hydraulic line severed, the left slats automatically retracted, while the right wing slats stayed extended. This caused a deadly imbalance. As the plane continued to climb, the left wing began to lose lift. The aircraft started to roll left, slightly at first, then more dramatically. The pilots fought desperately to correct it, but their instruments betrayed them. With the engine gone, electrical systems on the left side were dead, including the captain's instruments. The cockpit voice recorder captured their confusion and struggle to understand what was happening. To them, it might have looked like an engine failure or maybe a partial power loss, but in truth, they were facing a catastrophic aerodynamic stall on one side. Meanwhile, on the ground, hundreds of people had their eyes fixed on the sky. Mechanics, airport workers, and drivers along Des Plaines River Road saw the aircraft banking sharply to the left. Some described it as if the plane were trying to turn back toward the airport. But within seconds, the bank angle increased beyond recovery. The aircraft flipped almost completely on its side. For a brief, haunting moment, it appeared suspended in the air. Then, nose first, it plunged toward the ground. At 2:50 p.m. and 50 seconds, just 31 seconds after takeoff, American Airlines Flight 191 crashed into an open field near the old Ravenswood Airport. only a half-mile from the runway's end. The impact was catastrophic. The fully fueled DC-10 exploded on contact, sending a massive fireball into the sky. Flames and black smoke rose hundreds of feet as debris scattered across the field and nearby trailer park. Every single person on board a 271 live vessel was lost instantly. 2 more people on the ground were killed by the inferno. It was the worst aviation disaster in U.S. history at the time. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, but there was nothing to save. The wreckage was unrecognizably twisted metal, smoldering fuselage fragments, and pieces of luggage scattered among the debris. The fire burned so intensely that firefighters couldn't approach the site for several minutes. News of the crash spread rapidly across Chicago and the country. Television stations interrupted regular programming for the families waiting at Los Angeles International Airport. The joyful anticipation of a reunion turned into horror as they learned that Flight 191 had vanished shortly after takeoff. In the days that followed, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, arrived at the scene to begin one of the most complex inquiries in aviation history. The main question was simple: how could a modern, well-maintained jetliner lose an entire engine during takeoff? Early speculation pointed to possible mechanical failure, maybe a design flaw in the DC-10, or even a maintenance error. The pressure was immense, not just because of the lives lost, but because hundreds of DC-10s were in operation worldwide. Airlines, pilots, and the public demanded answers. As investigators sifted through the wreckage, they recovered the engine that had detached. The pylon of the structure connecting the engine to the wing was fractured in a way that raised immediate red flags. It wasn't the engine itself that failed, but the pylon's mounting point. When engineers from McDonnell Douglas examined the fracture, they found signs of metal fatigue and damage caused before the flight. But the real breakthrough came when investigators discovered something troubling in the maintenance records. Just days before the crash, American Airlines had removed and reinstalled the engines on several of its DC-10s, including this one. The reason was routine maintenance to check for possible wear in the engine pylons. The proper procedure, as outlined by McDonnell Douglas, required mechanics to detach the engine first, then remove the pylon separately using a specialized fixture. But American, along with some other airlines, had adopted a shortcut method. To save time, they used the forklift to remove the engine and pylon together as one unit. This method saved several hours per aircraft, but it was risky. The forklift approach required precise positioning. Even a slight misalignment could put stress on the pylon's attachment points. Investigators learned that during maintenance on Flight 191's aircraft, the forklift had accidentally nudged the pylon, causing a small crack in the metal fitting that attached it to the wing. The damage wasn't visible to the naked eye, and no one realized it had occurred. Over the next few flights, that crack grew larger until, on May 25, it failed completely under the stress of takeoff. The engine tore away, severing hydraulic lines and triggering the deadly chain of events. The revelation shocked the aviation industry. It wasn't a design flaw alone, nor pilot error. It was a combination of poor maintenance practices and a system that allowed cost-cutting measures to override safety procedures. McDonnell Douglas came under scrutiny for approving the alternative maintenance methods used by airlines, while American Airlines faced harsh criticism for implementing them. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, grounded all DC-10s in the United States, pending a full review. For nearly 6 weeks, the DC-10 fleet was suspended. Airlines scrambled to adjust schedules, passengers canceled bookings, and confidence in the aircraft plummeted. Newspapers ran headlines describing the DC-10 as a death trap. McDonnell Douglas engineers worked tirelessly to prove the plane's safety. Eventually, modifications were made to the engine mount structure, and the grounding was lifted. But the damage to the DC-10's reputation lingered for years. Behind the technical details and investigations, there were the human stories of the families left shattered by the tragedy. Among the passengers were entire families traveling for Memorial Day, business people, newlyweds, and even a group of children heading to California for a school trip. At memorial services held across the country, loved ones mourned those who never came home. The names of the victims were read aloud, one by one, their absence echoing in the silence that followed each name. For Chicago, the crash of Flight 191 left a deep scar. The field where the plane went down became a solemn place, visited by mourners and aviation enthusiasts alike. Over the years, the area was redeveloped, but the memory of that day never faded. In 2011, more than 3 decades after the tragedy, a permanent memorial was finally established at Lake Park in Des Plaines, Illinois. A peaceful garden engraved with the names of all 273 victims. Families and survivors gathered there to honor their loved ones, ensuring that their story would never be forgotten. The legacy of Flight 191 extends far beyond its immediate aftermath. It changed aviation maintenance practices around the world. The FAA tightened oversight, requiring airlines to strictly follow manufacturer procedures without shortcuts. McDonnell Douglas redesigned several components of the DC-10, improving redundancy and structural integrity. Pilots received updated training on how to handle engine detachment scenarios, and aircraft manufacturers began implementing more advanced fail-safes to prevent cascading failures. The tragedy also sparked broader conversations about corporate responsibility. Many questioned how safety could have been compromised in pursuit of efficiency. The investigation revealed a sobering truth. In aviation, even the smallest deviation from protocol can lead to catastrophe. It wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was a human failure. A reminder that every checklist, every bolt, every instruction exists because someone, somewhere, paid the price for it. Today, decades later, aviation is safer than ever. Modern aircraft are equipped with multiple redundant systems designed to prevent accidents like Flight 191. Maintenance procedures are rigorously standardized, and the lessons learned from that crash have been written into the DNA of airline safety culture. Yet, even with all the progress, the haunting image of that DC-10 rolling onto its side and plummeting to the earth remains etched in history. For those who study aviation disasters, Flight 191 is more than just a case study. It is a defining moment that reshaped how we think about safety, engineering, and accountability. It reminds us that tragedy often serves as the harshest teacher. In every pre-flight inspection, every engineering manual, and every FAA regulation, there's a trace of what was learned from that single afternoon in 1979. When the memorial at Lake Park was unveiled, one of the relatives of a victim said, "They're not just names on a plaque. They are the reason the next generation flies safer." And that sentiment captures the enduring legacy of Flight 191. Out of the flames of tragedy came change, a painful, costly, but essential. As the sun sets over O'Hare today, planes continue to take off and land in a seamless rhythm of precision and trust. Passengers buckle their seat belts, flight attendants give familiar safety demonstrations, and pilots run through their checklists of procedures refined through decades of experience. Most travelers will never think about what happened on May 25, 1979, but every flight that climbs safely into the sky carries a piece of that history within it, silently honoring those who were lost. The tragedy of American Airlines Flight 191 stands as a sobering chapter in aviation history, a story of human error, engineering lessons, and the relentless pursuit of safety. It is a reminder that behind every regulation and every safety improvement lies the story of lives cut short, of mistakes learned the hardest way possible. And while the names of the victims may fade from memory with time, their legacy continues to fly high above the clouds, carried forward by the very industry that vowed never to let such a disaster happen again.